The air at Fort Benning was thick with humidity and tension, a mix of Georgia heat, sweat, and disbelief. A single helicopter thudded overhead, scattering dust across the assembly yard. Dozens of Ranger candidates stood shoulder to shoulder in formation, their uniforms streaked with dirt, their faces hardened by the weeks that had already broken many others. Among them stood Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, the only woman in the lineup. Her frame was lean but wiry. Her uniform fitted too loosely around shoulders, built for more discipline than bulk. Sweat traced lines through the camouflage paint on her cheeks. Her brown eyes, steady and unreadable, fixed on the instructor pacing before them. No one said her name aloud, but everyone knew who she was, the woman who thought she could become a ranger. The instructor's voice cut through the heat like a whip. Ranger school isn't about equality. It's about survival. Out here, the mountain doesn't care what you are. He stopped in front of her, eyes narrowing. Do you understand that, Lieutenant? Yes, Sergeant Major, Sarah replied, her voice steady, not defiant, just calm. He stared for a long second, searching for a flinch that never came. Finally, he moved on, but a few trainees exchanged smirks. To them, she was a political experiment, a symbol, not a soldier. And symbols didn't last long in the mud. The first days were designed to break even the strongest. The recruits ran until their vision blurred, carried 80-pound rucks through mud that sucked at their boots, and went days with barely 2 hours of sleep. Every blister, every fall was a test. Sarah learned quickly that her body wasn't her biggest enemy. Perception was. When she stumbled, whispers followed. When she didn't, silence did. Every move she made was watched. Every mistake was proof to someone that she didn't belong. On the third day, after a grueling march, they were ordered to drop and start push-ups in the mud. The rain poured so hard that visibility vanished. Helmets became buckets of water. Her arms trembled as she hit her 100th push-up, elbows slicing through sludge. To her left, a soldier collapsed. To her right, another groaned and rolled onto his back. Sarah kept going. When the count finally ended, the instructor stalked down the line, his boots sinking in the wet ground. "Mitchell," he barked, "why the hell are you still moving?" She didn't look up. "Because you haven't told me to stop, Sergeant Major." A few trainees actually chuckled, the first time anyone had. The instructor's lips twitched, maybe almost a grin, before he moved on. That night, they slept in the dirt. Sarah's fingers were too swollen to unbuckle her vest. Her knees throbbed from the day's punishment. Around her, soldiers cursed softly or wept quietly, hiding faces in helmets. She turned her face toward the stars, a patch of silver through the storm clouds, and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow." By the end of week 2, 27 candidates had dropped out. Their names were erased from the boards, as if they'd never been there. Sarah's name remained. Her squad's resentment grew in strange ways. A few tried to protect her, thinking she needed it. Others tried to outpace her, determined not to be outperformed. She ignored both. Her rhythm became mechanical. Wait, march, climb, crawl, survive. One night, during the Derby phase, they were ordered to move through a swamp under blackout conditions. The mud was waist-deep, the smell of rot thick enough to taste. Each candidate carried full gear and an M4 rifle above the waterline. Halfway through, one man lost footing and dropped into a sinkhole. Panic rippled through the ranks. The swamp could swallow a man whole. Without thinking, Sarah shoved her pack to another soldier and plunged after him. Her fingers closed around his strap, just as his helmet vanished beneath the water. She heaved with every ounce of strength, lungs burning, pulling him free. By the time they reached solid ground, both were shaking from exhaustion. The instructor on duty said nothing, only scribbled something in his notes. The next morning, The rescued soldier walked up to her during rations and muttered, "Didn't think you had it in you, Mom." Sarah didn't answer. She just kept eating, slow and steady. Word of the swamp incident spread quietly. Respect didn't come fast at Ranger School, but when it came in silence. A canteen handed without being asked. A place made in the shade. A nod at inspection. Still, the pressure never eased. During obstacle training, Sarah's forearms trembled on the rope climbs. Her gloves tore. When she finally reached the top, mud dripping off her sleeves, she heard someone shout, "Hey, Mitchell!" Didn't know women could fly. She didn't waste breath replying. She simply swung down, landed squarely on both feet, and jogged to the next station. That night, as they cleaned weapons, one of the younger recruits leaned closer and said, "They're just trying to get in your head." Sarah looked up. "They can have it. I don't use it much out here." The boy laughed, a short, surprised laugh that eased the tension. For the first time, Sarah wasn't alone. As the weeks dragged into months, fatigue became a living thing. Everyone's eyes sank deeper. The line between day and night blurred. But Sarah had found a rhythm inside the pain. Every blister, every cut, was proof she hadn't quit. The instructors watched her differently now, not with suspicion, but curiosity. She wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but she was unbreakable. During a navigation drill in the mountains, the squad got lost after sunset. Most panicked, but Sarah pulled out her compass and whispered, "We're east of the ridge. Water flows south. Follow it." Hours later, they stumbled into camp, dirty, starving, but alive. The instructor looked up from his clipboard. "Who got you here?" No one answered. They didn't need to. One morning, before dawn, they were ordered to assemble for a 10-mile run in full gear. The sky was still dark, the air biting cold. Sarah's legs ached with every stride, but her breathing was steady. Around mile 7, a soldier ahead of her began to falter. His pack slipped sideways, his pace collapsing. She caught up, grabbed the strap, and pulled it upright without breaking stride. He glanced at her, breathless. "You don't have to." "I know," she said. "Keep running." When they crossed the finish line, the instructor clicked his stopwatch and yelled, "Mitchell, you're middle of the pack." "Still here, Sergeant Major," she replied between gasps. He grinned. "That's the only place that matters." By the time the first airborne drill was announced, Sarah had become more than a curiosity. She was a quiet force. Even the skeptics had stopped betting against her. The night before the jump, she sat beside the barracks wall, cleaning her weapon under the dull glow of a single lamp. The man who had once mocked her during the rope climb sat down beside her. After a moment, he said softly, "You're going to make it, aren't you?" She looked at him, then back at the rifle. "I already did." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. At dawn, the helicopter blades roared to life. The candidates lined up, hearts pounding. Sarah fastened her harness, checked her static line, and waited for her cue. She felt the machine rise beneath her, wind, thunder, and adrenaline merging into one. Somewhere deep down, the old whispers still lingered, "She doesn't belong here. She won't make it." She smiled faintly under her helmet. Let them watch. Let them doubt. Because tomorrow, when she stepped out of that helicopter into open sky, the world would learn what she already knew. Rangers don't fall. They land. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It wasn't a storm anymore. It was a punishment. Sheets of water fell so hard that even the trees seemed to bow under it. The training ground at Fort Benning had transformed into a swamp. Every step made a sucking sound as boots vanished into the sludge, pulling at the legs like something alive. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell moved through the muck one deliberate step at a time. her 80-pound rucksack strapped tight against her shoulders. Her uniform clung to her skin, soaked through and heavy with grime. The straps dug into her collarbones until they were raw. Each movement felt like dragging another person's weight uphill. But Sarah didn't stop. She could hear the rasping breaths of the men ahead of her, the same ones who once whispered that she wouldn't last. Now, no one had the strength to whisper anything. Ranger School had ground them all down to the same mud-colored exhaustion. Rank, gender, background, none of it mattered here. Out here, you either endured or disappeared. "Pick it up, Rangers!" shouted Sergeant Major Harlow, his voice cutting through the storm like gravel. He stalked alongside the line of trainees, rain streaming off his hat brim. The enemy doesn't care if you're cold. The mountain doesn't care if you're tired. You move until I say stop. Sarah shifted the rifle slung across her chest and leaned forward into the wind. Her muscles screamed. Her boots squelched. Somewhere behind her, someone coughed violently, half choking on water. She didn't look back, not because she didn't care, but because looking back meant losing rhythm. And rhythm was survival. After another hour of marching, the whistle blew. The squad dropped where they stood, collapsing into the mud like falling trees. Sarah sank to her knees, catching her breath, rain running down her face. "Form perimeter." Harlow barked. Groaning, the trainees scrambled up, forming a rough defensive circle. They were soaked, filthy, and trembling from exhaustion. Sarah's teeth chattered, but she didn't let it show. She knelt, scanning the tree line, her rifle steady. Night fell fast. The storm turned colder. Each candidate was given one Mari pack to last through the next 24 hours. Sarah tore hers open under a poncho, using her body to shield the flame of her heat pack from the wind. Steam rose faintly as she stirred the lukewarm beef stew inside. Private Collins, sitting a few feet away, stared at her meal with envy. His own pack had gotten soaked during the march. Without hesitation, Sarah broke her meal in half and handed him the pouch. "Half's enough for me," she said. He hesitated, shame flickering across his face. "You sure?" She nodded. "Eat. You'll need it." He didn't thank her. He just ate. Out here, gratitude wasn't spoken. It was earned. When dawn finally crawled across the horizon, it found the trainees already moving. The storm had left the training zone looking like the surface of another planet, pits of brown water, fallen branches, and deep craters carved by runoff. The mission today, obstacle endurance. Harlow stood before them, clipboard in hand. "Rangers," he shouted, "you'll climb, crawl, swing, and run until you forget how to spell your own names. You think yesterday was bad? Yesterday was breakfast. Today is war." No one groaned. They just lined up. Sarah's squad hit the rope climb first. The ropes were slick with rain, the knots invisible under layers of mud. The first candidate slipped and slammed into the ground, cursing. The next made it halfway before freezing. Then it was Sarah's turn. She grabbed the rope, mud squelching between her gloves, and began to climb. Every pull set her arms on fire. Her knees scraped against the rough fibers. Halfway up, her left boot slipped, sending her swinging sideways. A collective gasp went up from the ground. She gritted her teeth. "Not today," she muttered. With a raw, guttural growl, she drove her legs against the rope, finding balance again. Inch by inch, she hauled herself upward. The rain blurred her vision, but she didn't stop. Finally, she slapped the wooden beam at the top, signaling completion, and descended in one controlled slide. When her boots hit the mud, Sergeant Major Harlow was waiting. His expression was unreadable. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "I thought you'd fall." Sarah wiped the mud from her face. Then you thought wrong, Sergeant Major. For the first time, he didn't bark back. He just nodded and turned away. The next obstacle was the low crawl under live fire, barbed wire stretched inches above the ground, machine guns firing overhead. The air smelled of cordite and wet earth. The sound of gunfire echoed off the hills, deafening and relentless. Sarah dropped flat on her stomach and began to crawl. The mud was freezing, thick, and clung to her gear like a second skin. Bullets snapped over her helmet. Her elbows bled as she dragged herself forward. Halfway through, a soldier ahead froze, panic-stricken, trapped by fear. Sarah could see his hands trembling, his breathing ragged. The instructor shouted for him to move, but he was paralyzed. Without pausing, Sarah reached forward, grabbed the strap of his vest, and pulled. Inch by inch, she dragged him through the mud, both of them scraping under the wire. He started moving again once he realized what she was doing. They crossed the finish line together, collapsing into the trench. The instructor nearest them just stared, shaking his head. "You're all insane," he muttered. Sarah spat out a mouthful of mud. Just following orders. By late afternoon, the rain had finally stopped. Steam rose off the ground as the sun returned, turning the field into a foggy wasteland. The squad huddled together under makeshift tarps, bandaging cuts and rewrapping blisters. Sarah sat apart, cleaning her rifle, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. "Mitchell," a voice said behind her. She looked up to see Sergeant Major Harlow standing there, arms crossed. His face, normally stone, had softened a fraction. "You ever wonder why we push so hard?" he asked. She thought for a moment. "Because war doesn't care if you're tired." He nodded. "Close enough. But there's more to it. Rangers don't win because they're stronger. They win because they keep moving after everyone else stops." He paused. "You've got that. Don't lose it." Then he walked away. For the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Night fell again. The forest crackled with insects and distant thunder. The squad lay in shallow trenches, trying to rest. Sarah stared at the stars, clearer now, scattered like cold fire across the sky. Her body ached. Her hands were blistered, nails cracked, lips split. She had no illusions of comfort, no fantasies of victory. Just one simple, unbreakable thought. Keep going. The rain started again, softly this time. Someone muttered nearby, "You think we'll all make it?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. She turned her head, eyes half open, and said quietly, "Not all. But those who do will never forget how they got here." Her voice faded into the rhythm of rain. By the time morning came, the mud field looked like a graveyard of boots and spent shells. But standing at the front of the line, helmet tilted low, gear soaked, was Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, still standing, still breathing, still unbroken. Every man who had doubted her now knew better. No one said it aloud, but they didn't need to. The way they looked at her had changed. In Ranger School, respect isn't handed. It's earned in sweat, blood, and silence. And that morning, as the whistle blew for another march, the silence around Sarah wasn't doubt anymore. It was respect. Because she had walked through fire in the mud and never stopped moving. And somewhere deep in the swamp of Georgia, a phrase began to whisper through the ranks, quiet, reverent, and growing stronger with each mile they marched. Rangers never fall. They land. The morning fog hung heavy over the training zone, thick enough to hide a man standing just 10 feet away. The swamp from last week had dried into sticky clay, cracked in strange patterns beneath their boots. The air smelled of smoke and damp pine, the scent of the next phase, field survival operations. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell tightened her rucksack straps and glanced toward her squad. 12 rangers in training, each carrying everything they needed to survive 72 hours in the wilderness. No food supply drops, no radio contact, no shortcuts. This was where the weak vanished, and the strong found out what strong really meant. Move out, came the order, echoing through the fog. Sarah took her place near the middle of the formation as they began the long march toward the forest's edge. Each step sank into the soft earth. The sound of clinking gear and rustling branches filled the silence. Hours passed. The sun rose, burning through the mist. Their uniforms were already soaked with sweat. Mosquitoes bit through the fabric, relentless. "Mitchell," Sergeant Major Harlow barked from behind. "Your squad lead today. Your team gets lost. That's on you." Sarah saluted. "Understood, Sergeant Major." Harlow's grin was thin and knowing. "Let's see if the lieutenant can navigate better than she climbs." The squad laughed under their breath, not cruelly this time, but the kind of teasing shared by those who had started to accept her as one of their own. Sarah checked her compass, oriented her map, and gave the signal. "We're heading north by northeast. Keep the line tight. Eyes open." By midday, the forest grew thicker. The terrain sloped upward, tangled with roots and rocks slick with moss. The temperature dropped suddenly as the canopy thickened, dimming the light. Private Diaz, the youngest of the group, stumbled on a root. "Damn it," he hissed, clutching his ankle. Sarah paused, turning back. "You all right?" Yeah. Just twisted it." He tried to stand, but winced sharply. The rest of the team slowed, uncertain. The rule was simple. No one gets left behind, but falling behind meant risking the entire mission. Sergeant Blake, the squad's unofficial alpha, shook his head. "He can limp. We can't stop for every sprain." Sarah crouched beside Diaz. His ankle was already swelling, the joint pulsing under his boot. "He's not limping through this," she said. Blake crossed his arms. "Then what, Lieutenant? We fail because of one man?" Sarah met his glare. "We don't fail. We adapt." She tore a strip of fabric from her undershirt, braced the ankle, and tightened it firmly. "You can put some weight on it now," she told Diaz, "but keep it light. I'll take half your pack." Diaz blinked. "You'll what?" "Move," she said simply, hoisting half of his gear onto her own shoulders. Blake started to protest, but the look in her eyes silenced him. They moved out again, slower now, but steady. The forest seemed endless. Hours blurred together. By sunset, they reached a ridgeline overlooking a narrow valley where they were ordered to establish a night base. Sarah directed them to set up perimeter watch, dig foxholes, and camouflage their gear. When her tasks were done, she sat on a fallen log, breathing hard. Her arms ached from the extra load. Diaz approached, guilt heavy on his face. "You didn't have to do that, ma'am." She shrugged. "If I didn't, you wouldn't be here. And we'd all lose." He nodded slowly. "You know, they don't talk about you like they used to." Sarah looked at him. "No?" He shook his head. "They used to say you were here to prove a point. Now they say you're here to prove them wrong." For the first time in days, Sarah smiled, just a flicker, before standing and checking her rifle. "Get some rest, Private," she said quietly. "We move at dawn." The next morning brought a new trial. The forest was alive with echoes, branches snapping, birds scattering. The squad moved in formation, rifles ready. It was supposed to be a navigation and rescue drill. Locate a downed pilot mannequin and return it to base while evading simulated enemy fire. But somewhere between the valley and checkpoint 3, things went wrong. A deafening crack split the air. Blake, who was point man, stumbled backward with a cry. His boots sank deep into the mud, but it wasn't just mud. Tripwire, Sarah shouted. A flash, a concussive bang, erupted nearby, sending a plume of smoke into the trees. The explosion wasn't lethal, part of the training simulation, but the shockwave threw 2 men off their feet. When the smoke cleared, Diaz was gone. Where the hell? One soldier started, scanning the tree line. Over there, Sarah shouted, spotting a break in the underbrush. Without waiting for orders, she sprinted down the slope, mud flying under her boots. Lieutenant, wait! Blake shouted, but she was already gone. The forest swallowed her. Branches whipped across her face as she ran, heart pounding. Somewhere ahead she heard faint cries. Diaz! She shouted. Here! Ah! His voice was faint, panicked. Sarah crashed through a thicket and froze. Diaz lay half-submerged in a ditch, leg twisted unnaturally, bleeding from a deep gash below the knee. The fake mine had sent shrapnel flying. Not real metal, but sharp enough to tear skin. She slid down beside him. You're okay, Private? I got you. He shook his head. I can't move. It's bad. Stop talking, she said firmly. Let me see. She worked fast, tearing another strip from her sleeve and wrapping the wound tight to stop the bleeding. He winced but didn't scream. Her radio crackled faintly, static, broken words. Mitchell's status return. She pressed the mic. Negative, negative. Wounded trainee. Need assistance. No reply. The signal was gone. Sarah looked up the ridge. They were miles from camp. The terrain was brutal. Carrying him back would be impossible for most people. But she wasn't most people. She looped Diaz's arm round her shoulder and began the climb. Each step was agony. His weight dragged at her, his boots slipping against the wet soil. Sweat mixed with blood and rain. Her back screamed under the pressure. Halfway up, Diaz tried to speak. Ma'am, leave me. You'll shut up and hold on, she grunted. Rangers don't leave rangers. The slope grew steeper. Twice she slipped and nearly fell backward. Once she lost her footing entirely and crashed to her knees, gasping. But she didn't stop. When she finally reached the top, her vision swam. The squad was already moving toward her, Blake in the lead, eyes wide. Jesus Christ, Mitchell, he whispered. Get a medic kit. She barked, lowering Diaz gently to the ground. They worked in silence. When the bleeding was controlled and Diaz stabilized, Blake crouched beside her. You carried him 2 miles up that ridge, he said. Sarah didn't look at him. He would have done the same. He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. I don't think he could have. That night, when the squad returned to base, Sergeant Major Harlow was waiting. He listened to the report without interrupting, eyes unreadable. When Blake finished, Harlow turned to Sarah. Lieutenant, he said, you violated radio protocol, left your team, and risked mission failure. You also saved a man's life. He paused, then added quietly, next time, call for support before running into the woods. Yes, Sergeant Major. He nodded, then leaned closer. And Lieutenant? His voice dropped to a low growl. That's the kind of disobedience I can respect. Later, after lights out, Sarah sat outside the tent, staring at the faint glow of the moon. The camp was silent, except for the occasional rustle of trees. Her muscles ached. Her hands were shaking. But inside her chest burned something deeper. Not pride, not victory, but a quiet certainty. The whispers that once doubted her were gone now. She didn't need anyone's validation. She'd earned something more permanent, the trust of those beside her. From that day forward, no one called her the woman in the Ranger class. They called her Lieutenant Mitchell Ranger. And when the instructors later told her story, They spoke of the night she carried a man out of the woods, bleeding and broken, because she refused to let him fall. Because rangers, no matter who they are, never fall. They land. The dawn air over Fort Benning was colder than usual, sharp, biting, the kind that burned in the lungs. The runway stretched ahead like a silver blade cutting through the fog. In the distance, the massive silhouette of a C-130 Hercules loomed, the aircraft that would decide who passed the airborne phase and who washed out. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell adjusted her harness straps, the thick webbing digging into her shoulders. Around her, the other ranger candidates went through the same motions, some joking nervously, others silent and pale. For most, this was the dream moment, their first real jump. For Sarah, it was something else entirely, a confrontation with fear she'd buried long ago. The instructor's voice cracked through the air like a whip. Listen up. This is your final airborne evaluation. You will perform 3 jumps today, 1 static line, 1 low altitude, 1 night drop. Fail any of them, and you're out. You will exit clean, control your chute, and land in formation. You will not die today. Clear? Clear. The group roared in unison. The engines thundered to life. The propellers churned the air into a storm. Sarah's heart hammered in rhythm with the roar. She checked her altimeter again, out of habit, not necessity, and then looked down the line. Blake gave her a nod from 3 soldiers down. Diaz, now recovered and limping but smiling, lifted a thumb. She nodded back. They'd become more than squad mates. They were a unit now. And she wasn't about to let fear make her the weak link. Inside the aircraft, the noise was deafening. The cargo bay smelled of fuel, steel, and adrenaline. The jump master moved down the line, checking each harness, each static line. When he reached Sarah, his eyes lingered for a second longer than the rest. You sure you're ready, Lieutenant? He shouted over the roar. Yes, Sergeant. He smirked. Good. Don't freeze on the door. Sarah gave a tight nod. But as the ramp lowered and wind blasted into the bay, her stomach twisted. The open sky stretched forever, a shifting ocean of clouds lit by the rising sun. She swallowed hard. Her last jump had been years ago, during early Army training. That one ended with a collapsed chute and a cracked rib. She hadn't told anyone then, but she'd never quite shaken the ghost of falling. Stand up. The shout snapped her back. She rose, boots heavy, knees steady. Hook up. The line of soldiers clipped their static cords to the steel cable above. One by one, the jump master checked their connections. Check static line. Check equipment. Sarah touched each buckle, each strap, each loop, her movements crisp and automatic. Then, stand by. Her pulse roared louder than the engines. The red light glowed near the door, casting a blood hue across their faces. Outside, the wind screamed. Below, 10,000 feet of nothing waited. The light flicked to green. Go! One by one, they vanished into the sky, swallowed by the wind. Then came her turn. She stepped up, gripping the edge. The world tilted. The air tore at her skin. For a heartbeat, her body froze, memory flashing like lightning. The last fall, the twisting chute, the ground rushing up like a dark wave. Move, Mitchell! The shout ripped through her paralysis. She took one breath and jumped. The wind hit like a wall. Her body spun once, twice, then the static line snapped taut. Thwump! Her chute burst open. The jolt slammed through her spine, and she gasped. For a terrifying moment, the canopy fluttered unevenly. Then, miraculously, it caught air, billowing wide and smooth. She looked up. The white silk glowed in the sunlight, rippling. Perfect. Below her, the ground unfolded. A patchwork of green fields, roads, and the tiny dots of other jumpers drifting toward the landing zone. Beautiful, she breathed. The fear dissolved, replaced by awe. For the first time in years, she felt weightless, not just physically, but mentally. The sky was hers. She adjusted her risers, steering toward the drop zone. The air whistled softly around her ears. Then a scream. Shoot! Chute malfunction. Her head snapped left. About 50 yards away, another soldier's canopy had tangled, spinning violently. His reserve chute fluttered uselessly, twisted in the main lines. Damn it, Sarah hissed. She glanced at her altimeter. 2,000 feet. Too high to land, too low to call it in. Every instinct told her to stay clear. That was procedure. But the sight of him tumbling through the air, helpless, desperate, flipped something inside her. Without thinking, she pulled her right riser hard and turned toward him. The wind buffeted her, the distance closing fast. Hold on, she shouted, though the wind stole her voice. The soldier's eyes met hers for a second, wide with terror. At 1,500 feet, she reached him. Her canopy shuddered dangerously as she came close, the cords tangling near his. She reached out, grabbing his harness. The force nearly tore her shoulder from its socket. Cut it, she screamed. Cut your mane. He fumbled and yanked the handle. The tangled chute snapped free, spinning away like a dying bird. Sarah's chute lurched under the extra weight, but she kept control, fighting the drag. Grab the riser now, she yelled. He obeyed. They were connected now, two bodies hanging from one canopy, the lines creaking under the strain. Hold tight, she shouted again. The ground rushed up. 500 feet. 400, 300. She flared the chute at the last second, and they hit hard. The impact jarred every bone in her body. She rolled, dirt flying, the other soldier crashing beside her. Pain shot through her leg, but she ignored it. You alive? She gasped. He blinked, dazed, then nodded weakly. Yeah, ma'am. You just saved my damn life. Sarah exhaled a shaky laugh, staring up at the endless sky. Let's call it even. By the time medics arrived, word had already spread through the base. 2 jumpers, 1 chute, 1 impossible landing. Sergeant Major Harlow stormed into the med bay an hour later, expression unreadable. You disobeyed safety protocol again, Lieutenant, he said. Sarah sat up, leg wrapped in a brace. Yes, Sergeant Major. You could have died. Yes, Sergeant Major. He stared at her for a long time, and his expression shifted, just slightly. But you didn't. No, Sergeant Major. He nodded once. Then I guess you passed. That evening, the camp gathered on the tarmac to watch the sunset burn across the horizon. The sky glowed orange and gold, the same sky that had almost killed them, the same sky that had tested them all. Blake raised a canteen toward Sarah, to the woman who decided gravity was optional. Diaz laughed. To the lieutenant who makes rules just so she can break them. The squad erupted in cheers and laughter. Sarah smiled, small, quiet content. She looked out over the horizon, the same direction she'd fallen through that morning. For the first time, she understood something Harlow had once said, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and moving anyway. The stars began to appear, faint and distant. Tomorrow would bring the next test. The mountains. The real combat simulations. The mission that would make or break her career. But tonight, under that vast American sky, Sarah Mitchell finally felt what every ranger dreamed of feeling. She wasn't proving herself anymore. She simply belonged. The air in Kandahar was heavy with dust and heat. It was the kind of heat that clung to your lungs, that made every breath feel like swallowing fire. The smell of jet fuel, sweat, and desert sand hung over the airstrip as the transport plane's engines wound down. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stepped onto Afghan soil for the first time. The horizon stretched forever, endless tan ridges, cracked roads, and the ghostly shimmer of mirages rising from the earth. It didn't look like a battlefield, not yet, but the silence was deceiving. Everyone knew it. Her deployment had come faster than expected. Her record at Ranger School had caught command's attention. Within weeks, she was assigned to Task Force Iron Dagger, a rapid response ranger unit operating in the country's southern regions. Their mission: support Marine units trapped in isolated valleys under Taliban control. The first briefing came that night inside a steel shelter lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs. Captain Reeves, the kind of officer who looked like he'd been built from iron and sleepless nights, stood at the front with a laser pointer. 3 days ago, he said, a Marine recon platoon went dark in Sector 9. 34 men unaccounted for. Drone footage shows heavy enemy movement. Command wants eyes on the ground. We're going in at dawn. He paused, scanning the room. We move fast, we move quiet, and we bring our people home. No body bags, clear? Clear. The squad answered. Sarah nodded with them, though her stomach twisted. She'd trained for this moment her entire career. But training never prepared anyone for the smell of blood, or the sound of real bullets. The next morning began before sunrise. The Rangers loaded into helicopters, Blackhawks bristling with mounted guns. Sarah checked her gear 3 times over. M4 rifle, NVGs, spare mags, field kit. Her hands were steady, her breathing even. Across from her, Diaz grinned under his helmet. First dance, Lieutenant? Yeah, she said. Just hope I don't step on anyone's toes. He laughed, the kind of laugh soldiers use to cover fear. Then the rotors kicked up, blasting sand into whirlwinds. The helicopter lifted into the dawn, slicing through the pink sky toward the mountains. The valley came into view like something carved from nightmares. Sharp cliffs, burned-out vehicles, and black smoke rising in the distance. 2 clicks to LZ, shouted the pilot. Sarah peered through the open side door, eyes narrowing. Below, the remnants of a Marine position lay half-buried in rubble. Sandbags shredded. A Humvee overturned. The ground was scarred by craters. The radio crackled. Ranger 1, you are green for drop. Copy that, Reeves replied. Mitchell, you're on point once we hit dirt. Yes, sir. The helicopter banked hard, flares streaking into the sky. Gunfire flashed from the ridgeline, a storm of tracer rounds tearing through the air. Contact right. Contact right. Someone yelled. Sarah felt the chopper lurch as the door gunner opened fire, brass casings raining down like gold rain. The pilot shouted something into his mic, but the roar of battle drowned it out. Then impact. The skids slammed into the ground. Go, go, go. Sarah leapt out first, boots hitting sand. The heat hit her like a wall. Bullets snapped past. She dove behind a rock, returning fire in controlled bursts. Rangers, form line. Reeves barked. Push toward the Marine position. They moved fast, firing and advancing, dust rising with every step. Sarah's rifle bucked against her shoulder, the rhythm of battle taking over. She didn't think, she reacted. Years of training had become muscle memory. They reached the burned-out Marine camp within minutes. The air was thick with the smell of metal and death. A dozen bodies lay covered by ponchos, Marines who hadn't made it. Sarah's throat tightened, but she forced it down. Diaz crouched near a Cums crate. Signals fried. Looks like they were ambushed during extraction. Reeves scanned the map. Half the squad missing. Likely captured or scattered. He looked at Sarah. You're leading recon north, that ridge line. See if they fled that way. We'll hold this position. Sarah nodded. Understood. She gathered her small team, Diaz, Blake, and 2 others. 5 Rangers moving into unknown terrain. They slipped into the ravine, rifles raised, the world narrowing to the crunch of boots and the hiss of wind. Every shadow felt alive. Every rock looked like it might breathe. Half a mile in, Sarah found signs, footprints, American tread patterns, fresh. They went this way, she whispered. The team followed the trail through the winding canyon until the sound reached them. Muffled voices, foreign, harsh. Taliban fighters. At least a dozen. And behind them, cages. Sarah raised her binoculars. Inside one cage, slumped and barely conscious, was a Marine. His arm bore a unit tattoo, 3rd Recon. Her pulse spiked. We found them, she whispered. Diaz cursed under his breath. Too many hostiles for a clean grab. Sarah thought fast. We'll wait till nightfall. Set up flanks here and here. She pointed at a narrow ridge above the camp. Suppress fire from above, move in fast, grab the prisoners, and exfil through the dry riverbed. Blake frowned. That's suicide, ma'am. She met his eyes. Only if we hesitate. Night fell like a curtain. The temperature dropped fast. The enemy camp glowed dimly under the light of burning barrels. Sarah crouched behind a rock, rifle steady. Her earpiece buzzed. Ranger 1, ready on your go, Diaz whispered. Sarah exhaled slowly. Go loud in 3, 2, 1. Gunfire erupted from the ridge. The first shots dropped 2 guards instantly. Chaos exploded in the camp. Fighters scrambled for cover, shouting orders. Sarah sprinted from the shadows, her team close behind. Move, move! They reached the cages under heavy fire. Sarah slammed her rifle, butt against the padlock, once, twice, until it shattered. The Marine inside blinked up at her, dazed. U.S. Army, she said. You're safe now. Can you walk? He nodded weakly. Others, 3 more. West side tent. Sarah turned. Diaz, cover me. She darted toward the tents as bullets ripped through the air. She slid behind a crate, fired 2 rounds, and charged again. Inside the last tent, she found them. 3 Marines, tied, bruised, but alive. On your feet. She shouted. They stumbled out into the night as RPG fire lit the hills. Eagle 1, this is Iron Dagger, requesting emergency extraction. Grid 34. We have survivors. Copy, Iron Dagger. Black Hawks inbound, ETA 6 mics. The team retreated down the riverbed, covering each other as tracer fire chased them. The roar of helicopters grew louder, salvation in the sky. Sarah turned back once, seeing the flames of the enemy camp behind her. The rescued Marines staggered beside her, faces streaked with blood and dirt. As the first chopper hovered above, its searchlight cutting through the dust, one Marine grabbed her arm. Who are you? He gasped. She smiled faintly. Rangers. We land where others fall. When they touched down back at base, the medics rushed the wounded Marines to triage. Reeves met her on the tarmac, eyes narrowed. You disobeyed orders again, he said quietly. Yes, sir, Sarah answered. He studied her for a long moment. And you brought them home? Yes, sir. Reeves sighed, shaking his head. You're a damn nightmare for command paperwork, Lieutenant. But you're exactly the kind of ranger this war needs. Sarah saluted. Just doing my job, sir. He smiled thinly. No, Mitchell? You're doing more than that. That night, Sarah sat outside the barracks, staring into the desert darkness. The stars shimmered above, sharp and cold. Somewhere out there, the war still burned. But for 34 men, tonight, it had stopped. The radio beside her crackled with distant chatter. She closed her eyes, letting the wind brush across her face. She was no longer the trainee, or the officer trying to prove herself. She was something else now, a soldier forged by mud, sky, and fire. A ranger, and she knew deep down, the real battle had only just begun. The desert had gone quiet. Too quiet. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stood on a rocky ridge overlooking the valley below, her rifle slung across her chest. The sun was bleeding into the horizon, throwing long shadows across the land. It was beautiful, in a way that made her stomach twist. Beauty here always meant danger. Behind her, Diaz adjusted his scope, scanning the terrain. "I don't like it," he muttered. "It's been 2 days since the last ambush report. The Taliban don't just vanish. They're waiting," Sarah said softly. "They always wait." Their mission that day was supposed to be simple: a recon sweep west of Sector 9, ensuring the evacuation route for Marine convoys was secure. No direct engagement. In and out in 12 hours. But simple never lasted long in Afghanistan. Captain Reeves' voice crackled through the combs. "Ranger 1, status check." Sarah pressed her earpiece. "Sector clear. Moving north toward checkpoint Bravo." "Copy that," Reeves replied. "Intel confirms enemy movement near your grid." "Stay sharp." "Roger that." The team pushed forward, 5 rangers against the vast silence of the desert. The air shimmered with heat. Dust rose with every step. Then came the sound, faint at first, like a hum beneath the earth. It grew louder. Blake frowned. "That sounds like—" The explosion cut him off. A deafening boom ripped through the ridge. The ground heaved. A wall of dust and fire erupted ahead of them. Sarah was thrown backward, slamming into a rock. Her helmet cracked against stone. For a moment, there was nothing but ringing, and the taste of dirt and blood. "Diaz!" she shouted, coughing. "Status." "Static." She blinked through the haze, vision swimming. 3 shapes moved ahead, her team scattered, wounded. Another explosion thundered, closer this time. The ridge disintegrated into chaos. "Ambush! Take cover!" Bullets rained down from the cliffs above, invisible death slicing the air. Sarah dove behind a boulder, firing upward. The muzzle flashes were barely visible in the dust. "Command, this is Ranger 1. We are under heavy fire. Grid 26 Bravo." She shouted into the comm. "Request immediate air support." No response. "Command, do you copy?" Still silence. Her blood ran cold. The comms weren't just jammed, they were dead. The firefight stretched into minutes that felt like hours. Diaz crawled into cover beside her, blood streaking his arm. "Radio's fried," he gasped. "EMP burst, maybe." "We're cut off." "How bad?" "Bad. We've got at least 20 hostiles up top. They've got the high ground." Sarah reloaded, jaw tight. "Then we take it back." They moved like shadows through the dust, coordinating silently with hand signals. Blake tossed a smoke grenade to cover their flank, while Diaz laid suppressive fire. Sarah led the push, sprinting low, firing controlled bursts, every motion deliberate. They reached the first ridge, bodies pounding with adrenaline. The enemy fighters were dug into rock crevices, well-positioned and relentless. Sarah lobbed a grenade into one of the nests. The explosion tore through the sandstone, silencing the gunfire there. "2 down," she shouted. Diaz grinned grimly. "You're insane, Lieutenant. Comes with the job." They pushed higher, inch by inch. The sun burned red through the smoke, turning the world into a nightmare painting. Then a scream, Blake went down. A sniper's shot caught him in the shoulder. Sarah spun, dragging him behind cover. "You're not dying today," she hissed, pressing a bandage to the wound. He groaned, pale. "You sound sure. I don't make suggestions. I make orders." He laughed weakly, then passed out. As the firefight dragged on, ammunition ran low. Their radio remained dead. The rest of Task Force Iron Dagger was miles away, unaware their lead team was cut off. Sarah's mind raced. She couldn't just wait. Not here. Not surrounded. She had to get higher ground, find a signal, or they'd all die in the dust. "Diaz," she said, pointing toward a narrow cliff above them. "That ridge might get line of sight with base comes." He followed her gaze, eyes widening. "That's suicide. Then I'll go alone." "Hell no, Lieutenant. Cover me," she ordered, already moving. She climbed fast, boots scraping against stone, her body screaming in protest. Gunfire sparked around her, chipping rock inches from her head. She ducked, pressed close to the wall, and climbed higher. Halfway up, her hand slipped. A rock crumbled beneath her fingers. For one terrifying second, she dangled over the abyss. Then she slammed her other hand down, finding a ledge. "Not today," she whispered through gritted teeth. Finally, she pulled herself over the top. From up here, she could see everything, the valley, the smoke, her team pinned below. She grabbed her emergency radio, adjusting the antenna. "Command, this is Ranger 1. Do you read me?" Static, then faint, broken, ... Ranger 1. "Identify, repeat." "Command, this is Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. We are pinned in Sector 9, requesting immediate air support. Enemy strength 20+. Silence. Then, Ranger 1, copy. Air support inbound. ETA 10 minutes. Hold position." Sarah's shoulders sagged in relief. "Copy that. We'll hold." She slung her rifle, sliding back down the cliff. "Diaz, support's coming." He grinned through the dust. About damn time. Those 10 minutes felt like an eternity. The enemy pressed harder, closing in. Sarah fired until her rifle clicked empty. She drew her sidearm, hitting targets through sheer willpower. Then, in the distance, the sound of salvation. Whoop, whoop, whoop. 2 Apache gunships roared over the ridge, unleashing rockets into the enemy lines. The explosions lit the desert like sunrise. Fighters scattered, running into the dunes, only to be swallowed by flame and debris. Within minutes, the battlefield fell silent again. Sarah collapsed beside Diaz, breathing hard. "We hold?" she asked. He nodded. "We hold." Evac came an hour later. The medevac Black Hawk landed in a whirl of sand and noise. Reeves himself jumped down, helping load the wounded. He grabbed Sarah's shoulder. "I told you recon only. No engagement." She stared back, eyes hollow. "We didn't get a choice, sir." He studied her face for a moment, then simply said, "You brought them home again. That's all that matters." Later that night, Sarah sat alone outside the field hospital, her uniform still streaked with blood and dust. She watched the distant mountains fade into the dark. The adrenaline had drained away, leaving behind only exhaustion and something heavier. For the first time, she felt the weight of command, the kind that isn't about leading, but surviving the cost of it. She looked down at her hands. They were steady now. Too steady. That was what scared her most. Diaz limped out beside her, an arm in a sling. "You know, we're making a habit of cheating death." She smiled faintly. "Let's not make it tradition." He sat down beside her. "Command said Combs' blackout wasn't an accident. Someone jammed us deliberately." Her head snapped toward him. "You mean Intel thinks a mole's been feeding our coordinates to the enemy. Inside base. Sarah's jaw tightened. So the ambush wasn't luck? No. Someone wanted us dead. The night grew colder. The wind howled through the tents, carrying whispers of betrayal through the dark. Sarah stared into the distance, her mind racing. For the first time, the war wasn't just out there anymore. It was inside the wire. The wind that swept across the Kandahar base that night carried more than dust. It carried unease. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell couldn't sleep. Not after what Diaz had told her. The ambush, the Combs blackout, the way the enemy seemed to know exactly where they'd be. It all fit too neatly together. Someone inside their own command had set them up. She walked the narrow corridor of the operations tent, her boots thudding softly on the ground. The hum of generators filled the silence. Her uniform was clean now, but she still smelled the desert, the burned metal, the blood, the smoke. Reeves was in his office, bent over a map when she entered. His eyes flicked up, tired but sharp. "You're supposed to be resting, Lieutenant." "I can't," she said. "Sir, Diaz told me something." Reeves sighed. "If this is about the Combs, it's not just the Combs." He said Intel thinks someone inside jammed them deliberately. That the ambush wasn't coincidence. Reeves' jaw clenched. "Rumors. Don't let them eat at you." "With respect, sir, they're more than rumors," Sarah said, stepping closer. "We were sent into a trap. The enemy knew our exact grid coordinates, down to the meter." He studied her in silence, then turned back to the map. "You're a good officer, Mitchell. But this isn't something you want to get tangled in." "So there is something," she said quietly. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. The next morning, Sarah met with Diaz outside the motor pool. The sky was still a pale gray, the air heavy with the scent of diesel and dust. "I talked to Reeves," she said. "He knows something." Diaz frowned. "You think he's involved?" "I don't know. But he's hiding something." Diaz leaned against a Humvee, his voice low. "I've been talking to Intel. There have been other ambushes, small recon teams, same pattern. All comes blacked out, all hit with perfect precision. It's like the Taliban have our playbook." "Who has access to mission routes?" "Command Staff, Signal Corps. Intel Division." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Then we start there." That night, she went into the ops tent under the pretense of reviewing field reports. The night shift officer, Sergeant Patel, nodded as she entered, but didn't ask questions. She logged into the secure terminal and pulled up the mission brief from the day of the ambush. The data log showed transmission routes, encryption keys, and access timestamps. At first glance, everything seemed normal, until she saw it. A duplicate transmission had been sent 47 minutes before their deployment. The recipient address wasn't military. It was masked, a rerouted signal that bounced through civilian satellite networks. Someone had copied their mission data and sent it out. Her pulse quickened. She traced the access code. It belonged to someone with high-level clearance, Captain Reeves. She stared at the screen, disbelief tightening her throat. No, it couldn't be. Footsteps echoed outside the tent. She quickly logged out, grabbing a stack of random reports just as the flap opened. Reeves stepped inside. "Burning the midnight oil?" he asked. "Just reviewing after-action reports," she said evenly, forcing her voice steady. He studied her for a moment too long, his gaze unreadable. Then he smiled faintly. "Good. That's the kind of dedication that keeps people alive." She nodded. "Always, sir?" When he left, her hands were trembling. She had proof, but no idea what to do with it. The next day, she met Diaz again, out behind the medical tents. The air was already sweltering. "I found something," she said quietly, handing him a data chip. A copy of the transmission logs. Reeves' clearance was used to leak our mission coordinates. Diaz's eyes widened. You sure? I saw it myself. He looked around nervously. If that's true, you can't just sit on it. You need to take it to Division Command. And accuse a decorated captain without backup? They'll court-martial me before they even check the files. So what's the plan? Sarah hesitated. We get proof. Real proof. 2 nights later, Sarah slipped through the camp like a ghost. Her black tactical gear blended into the dark. She'd learned Reeves had a secondary comms terminal in his quarters, a private encrypted line, supposedly used for urgent field communication. If the leak had come from him, that terminal would show it. Diaz stood watch by the perimeter, keeping an eye on the MPs. Sarah picked the lock with careful precision. The door opened with a soft click. Inside, the room was spotless. Military neatness. Everything folded, labeled, squared. But on the desk sat a laptop still glowing faintly. She plugged in her beta drive, fingers flying across the keyboard. Encrypted folders. Multiple aliases. Satellite relay logs. And then she found it. A data packet time-stamped 1 hour before their mission. Inside was a complete transmission of their coordinates, sent through an untraceable relay network tied to Russian encryption protocols. It was him. Before she could process what that meant, the door creaked. Reeves stood there, his face half lit by the dim light. You shouldn't be here, Lieutenant, he said quietly. Her heart slammed against her ribs. You sold us out. He didn't move closer. You don't understand. Then make me. He exhaled, stepping forward slowly. Command doesn't care about you, Mitchell. Or Diaz, or any of us. They're running black ops, deals with local warlords, trading intel for territory. The ambush wasn't betrayal. It was containment. You saw something you weren't supposed to. Sarah's throat went dry. So you killed my team to keep their secret? I tried to protect you, he said, voice low. The order wasn't mine. But if you go digging, they'll bury you too. Walk away, and you live. She stared at him, disgusted. You think I'll just forget that you sold American lives? His eyes hardened. You don't have a choice. He reached for his pistol. Sarah moved first. A swift kick knocked his arm aside. The gun fired, the bullet grazing the wall. She slammed into him, the two of them struggling in the narrow space. Papers flew. The laptop crashed to the floor. He was stronger, but she was faster. She drove her elbow into his ribs, twisted his wrist, and wrestled the gun away. Don't make me do this, she said, breathing hard. Reeves froze, chest heaving. If you take this to command, they'll deny everything. You'll be branded rogue. Maybe, she said. But I'll still be alive with my honor. She stepped back, keeping the gun trained on him. You're under arrest for treason. By dawn, Reeves was gone. When the MPs stormed his quarters, the room was empty, the window shattered, footprints in the sand. Reeves had vanished into the desert. Sarah sat on her bunk, holding the laptop she'd recovered. Inside it was the evidence, encrypted transmissions, payments, coordinates. Enough to expose not just him, but the entire operation. Diaz entered, face grim. They say Reeves defected. Took a convoy north. Probably headed for Pakistan border. She nodded slowly. Then we're not done. He frowned. You really gonna chase him? That's a suicide run. She looked out toward the blazing horizon. I'm not chasing him, Diaz. I'm bringing him back. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of dust and diesel across the camp. This war had changed her, hardened her. But now, for the first time, she understood what it was really about. Not land, not power, not politics. It was about truth and the cost of uncovering it. The mountains stretched before her like jagged teeth against the sky. Dust and wind whipped across the ridges, carrying the scent of sand and gunpowder. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the plateau, her rucksack light, but her heart heavy. She was alone. The unit had ordered her to stay behind, but she refused. Reeves was out there, and the lives of soldiers he had betrayed demanded justice. Diaz had tried to stop her. "Lieutenant, this is a suicide mission. No one goes into that alone." She had shaken her head. "I'm not leaving him out there to destroy everything we fought for." He watched her go, concern etched across his face. "Just come back alive." The first clue was a series of tracks in the thin desert soil, tire treads from a stolen convoy. Sarah followed them through narrow passes, careful to avoid obvious vantage points. Every shadow felt alive. Every gust of wind could conceal an ambush. Night fell quickly in the mountains. The air dropped sharply, cold and unyielding. Sarah crouched behind a ridge, using the night vision goggles she had packed, scanning the valley below. Flames flickered in the distance. A camp. She counted the vehicles. 2 trucks, 1 Humvee, all modified for rough terrain. And there he was, Reeves, standing beside the convoy, giving orders to a group of armed mercenaries. Her pulse raced. The man who had betrayed his country was still commanding attention, still dangerous. Sarah formulated a plan. Stealth first, precision second. She checked her rifle, suppressed, scope zeroed, and her sidearm ready. 1 shot, 1 kill, she thought. Then move in. But Reeves wasn't alone. There were at least a dozen heavily armed men patrolling the perimeter. A direct assault would be suicide. She remembered the lessons from Ranger School: patience, observation, and improvisation. She scouted a narrow canyon leading behind the camp. If she could sneak in from the rear, she could disable their vehicles and cut off their escape. The climb was treacherous. Rocks crumbled beneath her hands. Each step required careful balance. But Sarah had climbed cliffs taller than this in training. And this time, failure meant more than failing a test. It meant death, or worse, letting the traitor escape. She reached the ridge undetected. From above, she could see the mercenaries moving in patrol patterns, unaware of the shadow looming over them. Sarah signaled herself, imagining Diaz beside her, giving a thumbs up. One by one, she set small explosive charges on the vehicles, ensuring a chain reaction that would trap Reeves' convoy if he tried to escape. Then she waited. The first truck ignited, a small spark, then a roar. The mercenaries shouted, weapons drawn. Chaos erupted. She moved down the canyon, keeping low, eyes on the target. Reeves was yelling orders, waving his arms. He had noticed something, but not enough. Sarah dropped down into the camp with the precision of a shadow. One quick move, and she had neutralized the first sentry with a chokehold. 2 more fell silently as she moved through the smoke and confusion. The final confrontation was imminent. Reeves saw her then, eyes wide with disbelief. "Mitchell? You betrayed American lives," she said, voice steady. "It ends tonight." He laughed, raising his weapon. "You think you can stop me? Do you know who you're messing with?" She didn't flinch. "I know exactly who you are." They moved around each other, circling, gunfire snapping in the background. Sarah's suppressed rifle was useless at this range. She drew her sidearm. Reeves fired first, missing by inches. She rolled to the side, firing 2 shots. He dodged behind a crate. "You're predictable," she said, eyes narrowed. "And reckless." He emerged, gun trained. Sarah feigned left, then dove right, tackling him to the ground. The gun skidded across the dirt. They grappled, a clash of raw strength and fury. He was stronger, but desperation fueled her. Years of training, pain, betrayal, it all sharpened her reflexes. She twisted his arm, forcing him to drop the weapon. "You think you're untouchable?" She spat, pinning him. "I'm not finished." He yelled, thrashing. "You already are," she said, applying a chokehold she had practiced hundreds of times. Reeves struggled for air, his rage palpable, until his body finally went limp. Sarah rose, chest heaving. Around her, the convoy smoldered, the mercenaries incapacitated or fleeing. She took a moment to survey the camp, ensuring no threat remained. She radioed command for extraction, giving coordinates and situation report. Within minutes, a Black Hawk descended, the rotors cutting through the smoke and dust. When the helicopter landed, Sarah guided the rescued mercenaries and secured Reeves. The captain would face military justice, treason, conspiracy, and endangering American lives. Diaz met her on the tarmac, grinning despite the exhaustion. "You're insane, you know that?" "I'm a ranger," she replied, climbing aboard. "We go where others fall." Back at base, Sarah handed over the evidence, logs, transmissions, confessions. Investigators would follow the trail, uncovering everything. Reeves' betrayal had been extensive, but with the proof, justice would be served. Later, she stood alone on the rooftop, staring at the night sky over Kandahar. The stars shimmered cold and distant. She thought of the men she had carried, the ambushes survived, the battles fought. Every moment had led to this point. Diaz joined her, quiet. "Think it's over?" Sarah shook her head. "Not really. There's always another fight, another shadow. But tonight..." She took a deep breath. "Tonight, we landed." He nodded. "And we lived to tell it." She smiled faintly, a weary but victorious smile. The desert wind carried away the dust and blood, leaving only the echo of survival, courage, and unbroken spirit. Sarah had faced the sky, the desert, and the shadows within her own ranks. She had fallen through fire and betrayal and landed, as all rangers do, with resilience, honor, and unwavering courage. The war would continue. The desert would call again. But Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had carved her place in history, a testament to what it means to be a ranger. And for the 34 Marines, for her squad, and for every soldier who had followed her lead, she was the proof. Rangers never fall. They land.